My name is Jonah Jonathan, and welcome once again to the Jazz Musician's Voice. Today, I've had the wonderful opportunity of interviewing Baritone Saxophonist B.J. Jansen, really a good friend of mine and an established cat on the scene. We got to talk through Skype. He lives in Kansas City, Missouri now, and we talked a little bit about our past history together and about his time on the New York scene, and he's got some great advice for musicians during this time of coronavirus, talking about getting a day job and some of those other aspects. So please check out this interview and definitely check out the links below. I'll give some links to more information about B.J. Jansen. Thanks for watching. Please stay tuned. We have a lot of great stuff coming up in the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, today I'm here talking with a good friend of mine, B.J. Jansen, great bari sax player and music business person. And I've known BJ almost like coming 13 years now, back from William Paterson days. Now we're both living in very different places. I'm up in Vermont and you're in Kansas City, Missouri. So let's go back and talk a little bit about your early upbringing. I think you're from Ohio, right?
Yeah, so I am from Cincinnati, Ohio, originally. Grew up there in the Coleraine area, and started playing saxophone when I was about 10 years old. Alto at first. My father bought me some tapes of Charlie Parker and Jerry Mulligan.
Wow.
Figure two of the greats there, and that got me started with the jazz bug at an early age. So I didn't quite know what they were playing, and I didn't understand what improvisation was probably till about 13 or 14 years old. And that's when I started studying improvisation, and made the decision I wanted to pursue music more seriously. So probably after high school, I did the marching band and all of those kind of things that you do in high school, band programs. And then following that, I went to the University of Louisville, studied jazz at the Jamie Aebersold program. And once I graduated from there, I moved to Philadelphia. And really, that was a whole nother education in itself.
Yeah, that must have been something, So when you went to the program in Louisville, probably at that time, Aebersold, he's like it was a big thing putting out his books and stuff. So did you collaborate with him, and what were some of the cats you worked on the program there? And then we'll get into Philadelphia.
Well, there was a lot of great players at the time. Jamie really had a lot of hands-on time with the program, took improv class with him. And, the program really was at a pretty pivotal point. We had brought in a bunch of international students, and also they had started their graduate program. So we had some pretty significant players come in through that, which was really interesting. Actually, Delphio Marsalis attended while I was there. We played together, in some ensembles, and I actually played on his graduate recital. So it was really cool to kind of have that kind of interaction as a young player with somebody who was that seasoned in the industry already. And as a student, and it was unique because I don't know if the program's been like that since that period of time. I mean, we also had John LaBarbera was at the school at that time teaching arranging among some other classes. So, for those that don't know who John LaBarbera is, or the LaBarbera is his brother Pat and Joe, and so there's a really great lineage there with the LaBarberas and their music, but he was a great arranger and well published and everything. So to be able to study with him was really amazing too. So yeah, there was some really amazing things at that program at the time, and also being able to have Jamie bring in a lot of people, because Jamie knows everybody. So and Jamie's super. He's always very, very giving of his time. He's a very generous guy on so many levels. So to be able to, as a young person, there was times where I took private lessons from him at his house.
Wow, yeah.
in his basement studio that he had, where he actually recorded a lot of those play-alongs that made him famous. A lot of those actually were even recorded in that little studio in his house. And also he actually had sort of a warehouse down there, so it was always really interesting, because at this time, that was like between 1990 and 2004, so the internet was kicking off, but things weren't quite the same as they are now. So definitely books and CDs were still king as far as content. So to be able to go over there and shop through his selection of stuff, and just hang out and check it out, the operation. I mean, it was very cool. So, and like I said, Jamie has always been so giving financially and with his time. So for those that don't know, I mean, very generous person to the
Believe
music.
it or not, our mutual mentor, Mulgrew Miller, also that was one of the first places he had gone, to Abersol back in the day.
Yeah.
Abersol, pretty big force. So yeah, and then I was going to Philadelphia. You decided to move there, and you were there for about 3 years. So that's really a whole other world in itself from New York City. So
yeah, so Philly has Philly actually, like I'm finding with Kansas City, it's a historic jazz town. So Philadelphia has so much. It's always had to sort of exist in the shadow of New York in some ways. So it's been a little bit overshadowed, but the history is so deep and so rich there. And the players, I mean, being able to go to a jam session and talk to cats that knew John Coltrane and, man, just hear the stories and, like, be able to sit in with a singer. There was a singer there who, actually was in bands with John Coltrane when he was living there. And, just being able to hear those stories, and then Mickey Roker, Sid Simmons, Mike Boone. I mean, the names of the cats who, John Swana, there's just so many great players in that scene. And during that time, so that was, like 2004 to 2007-ish, around there, I was in Philly, and I met some really great players, that have gone on to do some really big things. And, we start out young, and Frank Stagnita, another mentor that I had, met there. We just both arrived in Philadelphia at the same time, met at a jam session. His friend, I was playing, his friend comes up to me and goes, "Hey, do you know who Nick Bergnola was?" Yeah, of course I know who Nick Bergnola was. Well, let me introduce you to my friend Frank. He's new in town, and he used to play a lot with Nick in Troy area, upstate New York. And,
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where that introduction happened at Ortlieb's was the club. That was like the spot for a long time. And, Philly is just an amazing place to learn the music, because it's so real and there's so much history there. And actually, I'm finding here in Kansas City kind of reminds me of Philadelphia with that, because
Oh yeah, it's got a, I was fortunate enough to visit Kansas City once, and it does have a little history there.
just a little bit with Count Basie, Benny Moten. The list is so long. It's hard to even name all the people, because really what I found out about Kansas City historically is it's like a crossroads out here. It's been called the Paris of the Midwest. And part of that reason is because you have to drive 5-6 hours, 3 hours to get to any other city around here. So,
Yeah.
It just became a mecca for people in the area to come out here. And it's always been a big hub. So Kansas City has a deep history too. And I'm only, starting to get to know a little bit about the city, but it does remind me a lot of Philadelphia, actually. And also of kind of the little bit of time and interaction that I've had with folks in like Baltimore and Washington, D.C., which is also a very rich scene historically for jazz.
Yeah, certainly a place like Kansas City has its history. I visited once because my father's from South Sudan and there's a big Moro population there, and we went to like a summit. But I do remember going by, I don't know if it's still around, the Blue Room was there.
Yep.
And believe it or not, I think I had seen Oscar Williams then. And, Oscar is from Kansas City, and a mutual friend of ours at William Paterson. Segueing into William Paterson, you attended William Paterson for, business management, music business management. How did that shift come about? How did you decide?
I kind of decided, I didn't know what to do. I had been, playing in Philadelphia, and by this time I had already started playing gigs in New York. So, I was getting a little taste of the New York scene towards the end of my time in Philadelphia, and I was kind of like, what's the next thing? I was thinking about grad school. It'd be nice to have grad school under my belt, but I really, had to take a hard look at the value proposition of what that was going to do for me for grad school. So, I kind of, from my experience of having one music degree, quickly realized as I was trying to get day jobs and whatnot to, support the music habit, as it were, to keep playing and keep pushing on that and pay the rent, supplement the rent payment and all that bills. And I was like, well, what can I do that still involves music that, is also transferable and has a higher value? I didn't see value in going to school for music again, solely like a performance track. I wasn't necessarily interested in going into an education track, because if I were going in an education track, I would have to take a lot more classes, undergraduate classes to do that. So I came upon the idea, this MBA program, which was brand new. It was one of the first in the country. And so I started looking at the value proposition of what do I want to do that's going to be beneficial for the spend and the time. And I came up with this program, and it was one of the first, and it was an MBA. So it's music management as a primary concentration, but it's still an MBA. So you had to take all the business courses, and it really was attractive for the transferableness of having a backup plan, developing another skill set, and having a degree that has a high market value in the world that we live in.
Well, I mean, it certainly seems to have helped you. I remember, you were connected up with Jazz and Lincoln Center, and I remember going with you to some of the Winton rehearsals, and you did work in that program for a little bit with Jazz and Lincoln Center.
Yeah, it was a great experience. Sarah Villaggio was there leading the marketing department at that time. And it was a great experience, learning experience. It was great to see sort of the inside workings of how an organization that size works, and sort of kind of get the lay of the land on how things kind of work. Being that it's probably the biggest and most influential jazz nonprofit program in the country, I would say, probably in the world.
Yeah, it's a big program. And you also at the same time you kind of formed your I think, what is it, ARC, right? Management, or you had a label that you had formed, right?
Yeah, so I had joined ARC, which actually was founded by Chris Burnett and some other musicians, and I was asked to join an artist collective label, and I started with them. And oddly enough, Chris's former Army music, and he lives in Leavenworth here. So Leavenworth is probably about 40 minutes drive from Kansas City. So, it was kind of weird coming over here and then already knowing somebody that I had known for probably like a decade virtually online, and been like affiliated with the record label that he co-founded.
Yeah.
And then to move out here. So it's been great. So at that time, it was a label collective that they approached to join, and I've put out some projects on that. I also had dabbled into having like sort of some consulting. I had a company, have a company called Pitch Artist Services that I was doing at the time, and developing apps. I had one application that was actually written up in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, for listing. This was like when the apps were like really getting super hot, I guess, like 2009, 2010. Everybody had like iPhone apps. That was like the new thing, the big thing.
Yeah.
And I got into developing a little bit. So I was developing these apps around that, and even some games. I had one game that I had published called Jazz Wars.
Jazz Wars. I remember seeing.
So, it's because obviously there's always so much, for jazz being such a small world. Can be a contentious world at the same time, which always is surprising and not surprising, I guess. But I had that company and developed these apps for a time. And actually, it's funny because the app that I got published in the New York Times, there was actually a competitor app that basically took my whole idea, only they had more capital, so they had actual developers, so they could take it to the next level. And it was kind of interesting because as upset as I was about that, there wasn't a lot that I could do about it
Yeah.
legally.
Well, that happens. Even just take a look at the Facebook. He stole the idea from those the Winklevoss twins.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
those things happen, but segueing a little bit, we did talk about your time making recordings. I remember going to the studio with you with vocalist TC the Third
Yeah, absolutely.
in New Jersey at Tedesco Studios.
Uptown Jazz program.
Uptown Jazz Collective,
Yeah, Uptown Jazz Collective. Yeah, that was a lot of fun, and that recording was really out of the time in Harlem, spending a lot of time at St. Nick's Pub. TC the Third, a great vocalist. He was born in Philadelphia. His parents, Trudy Pitts and Mr. C. If you know anything about soul jazz and organ trio jazz, you're going to know the names Mr. C and Trudy Pitts for sure. And his parents. And he had a steady weekly Sunday night session in Harlem. So I believe it was 147th and St. Nick's.
Yep, St. Nick's Pub.
Yeah, which no longer, the building doesn't even exist anymore.
Yeah,
burned down.
Building burned down. I think they were doing an old movie, and they made a mistake, and the building burned down. But that whole area, believe it or not, my thesis was on the ethnography of the Harlem jazz scene, and I was able to find Jimmy's Chicken Shack was just a few doors down, where Bird had done dishes. And there's so many spots in that area that it's historic, But yeah, I definitely remember you kind of gravitating towards the Harlem scene. There were a few spots such as St. Nick's and Lenox Lounge and Paris Blues and all those spots. What kind of drew you to that aspect of the scene as opposed to the more downtown village scene?
Well, I think it was the maturity of the players and the maturity of the music. The thing that appeared to be lacking at the time for me was, the downtown scene. It was a lot of college folks, and occasionally, some really great players would come and sit in, and there were some that were there regularly. But what I didn't find was, there was a certain maturity and authenticity, I guess. There was something different about the Harlem scene. The players that came, the way they played, there was really just no limits to the scene and the vibe. And it just seemed, I don't know, more authentic to me.
Yeah,
in many ways. I don't know how, I'm sure that's gonna, for folks that watch this, I'm sure that's gonna be controversial, but that's my opinion. So
well, it's a completely different time of that scene of jazz. I was having a similar conversation with a good friend of mine, Radon Schwartz, the organist, and he was talking about taking house. He said, these young cats going through school have no idea what that is or that experience. And I said, yeah, the closest I ever came to that was St. Nick's Pub and being able to really swing the house, at a place like that. But you certainly segueing into your time as a leader, you've released quite a few recordings. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of your projects that you've done over the years?
Yeah, so I recorded, I had a band, I've always been kind of a band leader ever since college, actually ever since high school. So I actually had a band in high school when I was about 16, and it was called Dizzy Moods. And we did some talent shows and little gigs and stuff like that. And then when I got to college, I always had bands. So I had like the Louisville Jazz Project was a band that I had playing around, when I was in college, probably since my sophomore year. And there was also there was another band, and I can't remember the name, that I kind of like was a part of, that we did a lot of stuff, recorded some stuff, but really I started recording when I got to Philadelphia, and I formed a new band called Conjura. And then we went into a South Jersey studio, recorded a bunch of stuff. I did not release any of that until years later, when I moved to North Jersey to go to William Paterson. So a couple years later, I started releasing some of those recordings. And so I had, like 2, 3, I think it was three different albums worth of material that I released with the Conjura group. And then I also had another album called Syracuse Connection that I did with Frank. And that was on another partner with another label. And I can't remember the name now, out of Syracuse, that he was affiliated with. And we went up there and recorded an album with the owner, who was also a bass player. And then after that, I recorded, I think it was Uptown. That's when I joined ARC. And then we recorded the Uptown Jazz Collective, that album, which is really like a snapshot, a time capsule of kind of what was going on there at St. Nick's Pub. And then,
yeah, certainly.
And then after that, I went on and recorded an album called Ronin. And that was also around the time when I became a endorsing artist with Yanagasawa in Japan and Tokyo. And that one is interesting because part of the album, I had an all-female rhythm section playing. And, so I've always been very, very supportive of female artists and played a lot with, when possible, female rhythm players especially. And so that was a great project because I was able to showcase some really fantastic female players out of the New York area on that album. And then after that, I did, I guess it was Common Ground, which was a really big project compared to others. Had Dwayne Eubanks and Delphio and Ralph Peterson on that one, and Desron Douglas and Zakai Curtis. And, that was a really big project. And instead of releasing that on ARC, I actually formed my own imprint and released that on Ronin Jazz. And then I've released another album with George Burton and Desron Douglas and Wayne Smith on drums. And that one was a fun one. It was a fun one because we went in, we're all like about the same age. And so I wanted to do something with, kind of folks that were within a year or two of my own age, and kind of like also take a snapshot of that, folks that I'd played with a lot. And turned out really good with that. And that's Tradition, and that's on ARC. And I've got some more various projects that I've been involved with, but I think I'm now up to like about 11 projects. So yeah, they're starting to build. The newest thing that I'm doing is a YouTube series that I just launched probably about 3 months ago in the midst of all this COVID stuff. And, I'm trying to do like tips, tricks, gear reviews, kind of getting into the YouTube thing, because I see that as a great platform, and a great platform to have control over what you're doing, more so than even what I've seen on Facebook and some of the other places.
Yeah, YouTube I have found is just a great platform to really cement a time in history that will live on for a long time. I got interviews with plenty of cats who have passed now. Roy Hargrove, Mulgrew Miller, Unaja Allen Gums, Alex Lane. I mean, the list goes on, but those guys and that period of music is forever cemented. But segueing into some of our final stuff, I mean, the music industry and everything has really changed even since the time that we were there, William Paterson. It's especially with coronavirus, it's become quite the challenge. I know for you ended up going into more of the management side of things. I know you were talk a little bit about that. I know you were managing some stores for a while, and then you got into working with H&R Block. How does the day job aspect support your life and support you in doing your music?
Well, the one thing I would say to every young artist, every young person that wants to get involved in music right now, the days at this point in time of making a living. Now, making a living that's subjective, right? So there's different standards of living and different ideas of what you picture for yourself. But what I would say is the days of having a pretty decent standard of living are past us in many ways for just playing. So
Yep.
have a backup plan, whether that's, and I would go beyond, and I think unfortunately people are starting to find out now, beyond teaching music. So, I've seen a lot of folks that I know that their actual main bread and butter was never playing, but it was actually teaching. And now that's been eroded by coronavirus too, in many ways. And actually, I think it's going to continue to be eroded. So what I would say is, have plan A, B, and probably plan C. For myself, once I hit about 30 years old, the romantic notion of being broke and a broke jazz player, it just really started to lose the flavor, right? Because if you wanted to have anything in society, in the society we live in, there's a certain amount of financial means that is required. And so for me, I started to really start to leverage that MBA that I had and try to find a way to have a day job to supplement. At first, it was supplementing income instead of becoming a primary income. At some point you transition over that line where you're able to build your brand and your value to where it can become a full-time position. It makes it challenging with music because of the time aspect. But I think not being afraid of doing it is the key. And two, it can be done. You just have to manage expectations for yourself. And with good time management, a lot of things are possible, and people prove that over and over again. So for me, it was, it's the old curse whenever we enter any type of profession, especially if it's codified, institutionalized, or in a corporate environment where if you do a good job, your reward is doing more work, right? So, there's a lot of talented people out there in the music business that have been financially strained, have maybe avoided getting a day job. I don't think people should be afraid of that. Um, Having a day job and having a steady income can change the way you perceive what you're doing and can make you more selective on what you're doing. So instead of taking things that you have to take or undercutting people because you have to make that little bit of money, that $50 gig, you're able to sit back and not have to play that game, and you can wait and increase your time value of what you're doing. So you don't have to take the smaller stuff. You don't have to participate in the downward spiral of undercutting and all of those things, because quite frankly, that's kind of what we're facing. I mean, and this may be a controversial comment, but what I've seen on Facebook, even, it's like now we've come to a point where we're virtually busking. Everything's about a tip jar. I've come across wild things like, Ponzi schemes among musicians. You put in X number of money and then, you get paid out down the line here, and just wild things out of desperation that I've seen. And the one thing that I would say to the folks that have platforms that are much higher profile than I am, how are you using that platform now? Because right now there's no rules again, because everything has been leveled. There's no fancy gigs to be had. Everything's pretty much canceled. There's no jockeying for position to play in a certain club, because that doesn't matter anymore because people aren't going to the clubs. So instead of coming up with a Band-Aid, instead of coming up with how to hustle your fellow musicians or whatever, to survive, or just going on and begging for money, what are you doing to improve the whole system? Like, there has to be a better way, and where are we directing that energy, I guess?
Certainly. I mean, I've really been having this discussion with a lot of cats, and we could probably talk about this more privately, but I think the direction that things are going, there's gotta be like a virtual one place, kind of like a Netflix, one place you could go where you could watch all the live streams of some of these clubs. It might be a lot easier than, Facebook, where all these different live streams are so scattered and you can't even figure it out. It'd be real cool if you could just go to one app that's available on your Roku TV or whatever and see all the different performances all over the world, and maybe you pay like a blanket fee, monthly, just like Netflix, where you're paying $10 or $11 a month and you get all this content. Certainly could be an idea, but there's obviously all the business aspects of that, the challenges, because a lot of times, actually, people don't know this, jazz clubs have to pay a blanket fee for people to be playing their compositions at the clubs, and that would be a whole legal hurdle. But I'm sure we will adapt and things will happen. Thank you so much for talking to us. I'm sure people can find you at your website, right? bjjansen.com.
Yeah, I'm all over the place. But what I would say too is, I've seen some awesome positive creativity to come out to that. I don't want to end this with people thinking, that I'm denigrating or criticizing what people are doing. It's more of a challenge. You know, I'm seeing a lot of great things and great creativity with what people are doing, and that is always born out of necessity. So I think the key is, instead of trying to put a band-aid on something that's already, instead of treating a symptom of the disease, let's find a way to treat the disease.
Thank you, man. Thanks for talking to us. Keep on going on. You recently got a new place in Kansas City, and you recently got married, so congrats on that.
Oh, thanks.
Maybe you got some children in the future, right?
Well, I don't know. We'll see about that.
Yeah,
it's in
it's a process. It's in process. Well, BJ, thank you so much for talking to us.
Yeah, man. Thank you for inviting me, and it's been a great time and great to see you again.